I heard a scream cut through the park, sharper than anything kids' games could make, and when I looked up, a man with a gun was sprinting straight at a little girl. My body moved before my mind caught up. I was running, faster than I knew I could, knowing I'd never reach her in time. And then the gun went off. The late afternoon light laid itself gently across the park, a warm glaze over swings, benches, and the hand-painted mural along the low brick wall. Daniel chose the far table beneath the plane tree where the shade stayed steady, the kind that didn't slide away right when you needed it. He unwrapped two sandwiches with the slow care of someone trying to stretch a small pleasure. Liam had already kicked his sneakers half off, toes flexing inside their socks as he tracked a kite bobbing above the field. "Eat first," Daniel said, not stern, just steady. Liam nodded and bit into his sandwich, cheeks puffing out. "I'm going to beat my record on the bars after," he mumbled. "You'll beat it by taking your time," Daniel said. He pretended to study the city permit bolted to the table, using the printed numbers to keep his mind from drifting toward the unpaid bill folded in his wallet. A few more hours at the warehouse this week. Maybe the contractor would call back about the safety gig. He could be useful there. Checklists, rails, exits, the quiet work that kept harm from happening. The kind of job where no one noticed you as long as everything went right. A whistle of wind brought the smell of cut grass and the faint tang of the nearby fountain. Children's voices overlapped, counting, pretending, negotiating. Liam finished, wiped his hands on a napkin, and hopped down, pushing his sneakers on with a heel-toe twist he'd invented. He hovered, waiting for permission he already knew he had. "Go on," Daniel said. "I can see you from here." Liam flashed a grin and ran toward the climbing bars, the sun catching in his hair. Daniel watched his son's quick, deliberate movements, the careful way he tested each rung before committing his weight. It was a habit he recognized. The same care appeared in the way Liam checked the stovetop knobs twice or lined up his homework pages before school. Daniel felt a small bloom of pride, quiet and unshowy. A little girl darted past, laughing, her ponytail a metronome. A nanny jogged behind her. A couple shared a coffee on the bench by the chess tables. The park had its own rhythm, made up of strangers who somehow knew how to keep out of each other's way. Daniel let the rhythm work on him. The tightness across his shoulders eased. He folded the sandwich paper, squared the corners, and tucked it into his bag. "Dad, look." Liam hung by his knees, upside down, his shirt flopping toward his face. Daniel lifted a hand in a small salute. "Solid form," he called. He liked how the ordinary felt like safety. The scrape of sneakers on rubber matting, the squeak of swings, the dog bark that came and went without consequence. He thought about the last year, the hospital corridors after the accident, the hushed condolences that sounded like instructions, the way practical tasks had kept grief from hardening into something unmovable. He had told himself that if he could keep days like this stitched together, one careful afternoon after another, then Liam would feel held even when the world forgot to be gentle. A gust lifted the kite higher. Its tail snagged on a branch, then slipped free. Liam bounded from the bars to the slide, paused to let a smaller boy go first, and Daniel had the odd sensation of watching two times at once. The child Liam was, and the taller, broader version who would someday make his own choices without looking back for approval. He felt the wish to freeze everything and the acceptance that you never could. He took a breath and let it out slowly. "We're okay," he said under it, not to anyone in particular. On the field's edge, a blue SUV rolled to a stop. Daniel glanced up, just a glance, the way you mark a new shape in familiar space, and turned his attention back to Liam, who had started a careful, determined climb up the rope net. The sun dropped another inch, turning the metal bars to thin lines of copper. A soccer ball thudded, a whistle chirped, the fountain hissed softly in its stone basin. The moment held, ordinary and whole, suspended like a drop of water before it falls. The first sound that didn't belong was a scream. It wasn't the sharp squeal of children's games, not the call of a frustrated parent. It carried the kind of raw panic that cuts through every other noise. Daniel's head lifted instinctively. Across the field, by the swing set, a little girl had frozen mid-step, eyes wide as a man rushed toward her, arm outstretched. The glint of metal in his hand turned the air brittle. For a split second, Daniel didn't think. His body knew before his mind caught up. He pushed off the table and sprinted, his lungs filling with the copper taste of fear. "Liam, stay there," he shouted over his shoulder. His son's startled gasp vanished behind him. The world narrowed. The girl stumbling backward, the man's boots pounding the dirt, the screams slicing upward again. Daniel crossed the grass in wide, unmeasured strides, every muscle drawn to a single purpose. He wasn't a cop, wasn't trained for combat. He was a father who knew what it meant to throw himself between harm and a child. The crack of the gun came like a thunderclap. He felt the impact tear into his side, a shock that lit his nerves with fire. But he didn't stop. He launched forward, knocking the girl down and curling around her as if his body were a shield fashioned on instinct alone. The ground came hard against his shoulder, dust filling his mouth. The man's shadow loomed, then broke away at the sound of a dozen shouts from nearby adults. Running feet, the scatter of terrified voices. Daniel pressed the girl's small frame tight against his chest. "You're okay," he muttered through clenched teeth, though his own breath came ragged. He felt her trembling, her tiny fists clutching his shirt as if she could fuse herself into safety. Warmth spread across his ribs, seeping fast, but he kept his body locked over hers. "Don't let me die," she whispered, the words fragile and uneven. "You won't," Daniel said. His own voice surprised him, steady, certain, as if he could bend reality by saying it. He tightened his arms around her, ignoring the hot throb where the bullet had torn into him. His only thought was to keep her small body hidden beneath his until the danger passed. The chaos around them blurred. A man shouted for someone to call the police. A mother's voice cracked on her child's name. Liam's cry of "Dad" pierced through, but Daniel couldn't turn toward it. He forced his breath slow, pressed his cheek against the girl's hair, and whispered again, "I've got you." The gunman's footsteps receded, swallowed by the sound of others giving chase. A whistle of air, the clatter of something metallic hitting the path, and then more screams as people scattered. Daniel didn't dare move yet. His world was the circle of his arms, the fragile heartbeat against his chest, and the vow silently carved into his bones. Not this child. Not today. Only when he heard sirens in the distance did his body allow a fraction of slack. His head dropped to the ground, eyes closed against the spinning sky. The girl shifted slightly, still pressed to him, her breath sharp with fear. He whispered her name when someone shouted it, "Sophie," and felt her stir as if recognition anchored her back to the world. "I'm here," Daniel rasped. He wasn't sure if it was for her, for Liam, or for himself. The sirens swelled, their pitch bending through the park's wide-open air. Parents drew their children closer, some hurrying toward the gates, others frozen in that strange half-state between panic and relief. Daniel stayed curled around Sophie until a firm voice called her name again. Closer now, louder, filled with an urgency that didn't allow doubt. "Sophie." The little girl jerked upright, straining against Daniel's arms. He shifted just enough to let her look, and in that instant, an SUV screeched to a stop at the curb. The driver's door slammed, heels struck pavement, and a tall woman ran forward. Her dark blazer whipped against her sides, her hair pulled taut into a style that usually belonged in conference rooms, not parks. Sophie cried out, "Mom!" Olivia Grant dropped to her knees in the grass, gathering her daughters so quickly and so tightly it was as if she meant to stitch them back into one body. Daniel rolled slightly to the side, groaning as the movement tugged at his wound, but his eyes stayed fixed on them. On the way, Olivia's hand cupped Sophie's head, on the quick scan she gave from her daughter's shoes to her hairline, ensuring every piece was still there. "I'm okay, Mom. He saved me." Sophie pointed back at Daniel, her small hand trembling but insistent. Olivia followed her daughter's gesture. Their eyes met across that narrow stretch of trampled grass. For a long second, the world seemed to contract until it held only the two of them. The man lying bloodied, the woman still clutching her child. Daniel expected a blur of words, maybe orders or demands. Instead, Olivia simply breathed out. Her eyes softened in a way that broke through the steel of her corporate armor. She whispered, almost as if confessing to herself, "You took the bullet." Daniel gave the smallest nod he could manage. "She's safe," he said, voice hoarse. Two paramedics rushed in, carrying their kits. One knelt beside him, hands already probing for pressure points, while the other asked about allergies and injuries with the detached efficiency of practice. Olivia didn't move away from Sophie, but she didn't look anywhere else but at Daniel. Don't waste words, the paramedic said firmly, adjusting the compress against Daniel's side. Daniel grunted, but his gaze still held Olivia's. She straightened slightly, wiping at Sophie's tears with her sleeve. Then her voice, low but clear, cut through the medical instructions. I won't forget this. Her tone carried no flourish, no dramatic rise, only certainty. A vow made in daylight, witnessed by the park's uneasy silence. Daniel closed his eyes as they lifted him onto the stretcher. He felt Sophie's small hand brush against his own for a fleeting second, her grip an anchor of gratitude and fear mixed together. Over her shoulder, Olivia's figure stood tall against the setting sun, one hand steady on her daughter, the other hanging loosely at her side. She looked like someone who had been shaken to her core, but refused to let the world see the tremor. As they carried Daniel toward the waiting ambulance, he caught the faintest trace of her voice again, softer this time, carried more for herself than anyone else. Not forgotten. The doors shut, and the siren wailed anew. For the first time since the scream had split the air, Daniel allowed himself to drift, trusting that the girl was safe in her mother's arms. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something starchier, cotton sheets warmed too many times in the dryer. Daniel shifted against the raised bed, careful of the bandage that wrapped his ribs in a tight embrace. Every movement reminded him of the moment in the park, the flash of pain he'd swallowed so Sophie wouldn't feel it. He listened to the monitor's slow rhythm and tried to imagine it was only another clock ticking through an ordinary day. A knock came, polite but unnecessary, before the door opened. Olivia stepped inside, balancing a bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. The business suit was gone. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, though she still carried herself with the posture of someone used to owning a room. Daniel almost didn't recognize her at first, softened by the absence of formality. I wasn't sure if you'd want visitors, she said quietly. But Sophie insisted. She set the bag on the rolling table and unscrewed the thermos lid. A faint, comforting scent filled the sterile room. Homemade chicken soup. Daniel blinked. You cooked. A wry smile tugged at her mouth. Don't sound so shocked. I'm not hopeless in a kitchen. Besides, Sophie thought it was the only thing that would make you heal faster. Before he could respond, small footsteps pattered in behind her. Sophie appeared clutching a folded paper, crayon marks peeking out along the edges. She hurried to his bedside and laid it on his lap. I drew this for you, she said breathlessly. Daniel unfolded the paper. A stick figure with a cape stood tall beside a smaller girl with a ponytail. Above them, a sun smiled down. Across the bottom, in crooked but determined letters, it read, My hero. His throat closed. He cleared it roughly, buying time. That's some cape, he managed, tracing the uneven line with his finger. Sophie giggled and climbed onto the chair, her legs swinging. Olivia stood behind her, one hand lightly resting on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes watching Daniel carefully, as though measuring whether he could accept what she was offering. I looked into you, Olivia said at last, her voice steady but softer than he expected. I know you've been between jobs. I know you've been doing whatever you can to keep things steady for your son. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't like the thought of being researched, dissected like a file. That's my business, he said evenly. It is, she agreed. But after what you did for Sophie, it became mine too. I can't stand by knowing you put yourself at risk and go home to worry about medical bills on top of everything else. He shifted, wincing as pain shot through his side. I don't want charity. This isn't charity. Her gaze held firm. It's gratitude. And it's common sense. My daughter is alive because of you. Let me help with the bills. And let me offer something more stable than temp shifts. Silence stretched. Sophie leaned over and pointed at the cape again, humming quietly as if to fill the space. Daniel's eyes lingered on the crayon sun, bright and impossible, then lifted to Olivia's. He wanted to argue, wanted to keep hold of his pride like it was the last coin in his pocket. But the truth was his ribs ached, the hospital clock ticked, and the idea of another unstable week weighed heavy. Finally, he exhaled. We'll talk. Olivia inclined her head once, acknowledging his need to keep dignity intact. She reached for the thermos, poured a ladleful of soup into the cup, and slid it toward him. Then start by eating, she said. Heroes need strength. Daniel took the cup, the warmth seeping into his palms. Sophie beamed at him over the edge of the bed. For the first time since the gunshot, the tight band around his chest eased, not from the bandages, but from something simpler. He wasn't alone in the room. Weeks folded into one another with a rhythm Daniel hadn't known in years. The hospital bills that had haunted his nights disappeared without a word. When he pressed the matter, Olivia only met his stare with the same unflinching certainty she'd shown in the park. "You saved my daughter," she said once, her tone leaving no room for further debate. "Let me save you from worry." And that was the end of it. But her help extended beyond numbers on paper. Within days, she called with an offer, a safety supervisor position at one of her company's construction sites. The pay was steady, the hours predictable, the work exactly what he'd done before patchwork jobs had forced him into late nights and weekend shifts. "You know how to see danger before it happens," she told him. "I need someone who understands responsibility the way you do." Daniel hesitated. Pride still pricked him. But when he saw Liam bent over his homework at the kitchen table, chewing a pencil eraser like it was his last line of defense, the decision solidified. He accepted. From there, life began to change in small, almost invisible ways. His mornings no longer started with frantic calls hoping for day labor. Instead, he left the apartment with Liam knowing when he'd return. The fridge no longer echoed when he opened it. Groceries had become a planned ritual, not a scramble. And on weekends, there was time. Time to sit with Liam on the porch steps. Time to hear about a science project without watching the clock. Olivia and Sophie threaded naturally into that routine. First it was hospital check-ins, then dinners dropped off, then invitations. "The zoo this Saturday. Come with us," or Sophie insists Liam see her new favorite movie. Soon it was impossible to tell where one family's schedule ended and the other began. The children bonded faster than the adults could keep up. Liam taught Sophie how to balance longer on the monkey bars, while she showed him how to sketch cats that looked more like cats and less like squiggly clouds. Their laughter filled backyards, cars, and quiet rooms with the kind of ease that adults could only envy. Daniel sometimes caught himself listening from the doorway, marveling at how naturally they folded together. One evening, Olivia arrived late to pick Sophie up from a playdate. She found both kids sprawled on the living room rug, inventing a card game with rules so complex even they couldn't follow them. Daniel was in the kitchen, stirring pasta. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, and watched for a moment before speaking. "You cook, too," she said, teasing just enough. Daniel shrugged without turning. A man learns when he doesn't have a choice. Something softened in her laugh. She stepped into the light of the kitchen, the usual CEO steel tempered by the sight of her daughter's safe and content. "Choice or not, you're doing well." There were no grand gestures, no declarations, just a steady building of trust. Days layered into evenings, routines into habits, until it became normal for Liam to set out 2 extra cups for juice, normal for Sophie's backpack to sit by the door, normal for Olivia's car to pull up just as dusk settled. And in those ordinary moments, in children's laughter echoing down hallways, in grocery bags unpacked together, in tired smiles exchanged at doorsteps, the lives that had collided by chance began to run side by side, as if they had always been meant to align. The diner was the kind of place where the vinyl booths still squeaked when you slid into them, and the bell over the door jingled every time someone stepped in for pie or coffee. Daniel liked it for its anonymity. Here, he wasn't the man who had nearly bled out in a park. He was just another tired father splitting a plate of fries with his son while the jukebox hummed something from 20 years ago. That evening, Olivia joined them. Sophie and Liam claimed their side of the booth instantly, shoulders touching as they argued over which milkshake flavor was better. Daniel sat across from Olivia, their menus forgotten between them. For a moment, the scene could have been mistaken for something ordinary. A family dinner, laughter spilling over straws and ketchup bottles. The illusion broke when a man at the counter turned, his coffee mug paused midair. His brow furrowed as though flipping through memory, then his eyes widened. "Hey," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Aren't you the guy, the one from the park? The one who took that bullet?" The bell over the door went silent. Conversations around them thinned into half-sentences. Daniel froze, his fork hovering above the plate. He felt Liam's curious stare, Sophie's small hand resting on the table as if waiting for his cue. "I just did what anyone would have done," Daniel said finally, voice low. his eyes fixed on the countertop's reflection instead of the man. Not anyone, the man countered. Most of us would have ducked. You didn't. He lifted his mug slightly, almost like a toast. Glad to see you walking around. Murmurs spread, nods passed between strangers who suddenly recognized him, too. Someone whispered, "That's him, the hero from the news clip." A woman at the corner booth smiled warmly. The moment stretched longer than Daniel liked, attention pressing down like weight. Across from him, Olivia said nothing. But her eyes didn't leave him, steady and unreadable until the corner of her mouth curved, just enough for him to see pride flicker through. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was an affirmation, as though the recognition he shied away from was something she carried easily on his behalf. The kids broke the tension first. Liam leaned forward with wide-eyed amazement. "Dad, you didn't tell me people would know you." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Doesn't matter what they know. What matters is we're sitting here, all of us, eating dinner." Sophie giggled, nudging Liam with her elbow. "Your dad's famous." Daniel shook his head, but he couldn't help the faint smile tugging at his mouth. The man at the counter turned back to his coffee, conversations resumed, and the diner returned to its ordinary hum. Later, as they walked out into the cool night air, the bell jingling behind them, Olivia lingered close to his side. The kids darted ahead toward the sidewalk, still arguing over milkshake flavors. She glanced once over her shoulder at the diner, then back at him. "They saw you," she said softly, her voice carrying something heavier than the words themselves. "Not just for what happened, but for who you are." Daniel adjusted his jacket, uncomfortable with the attention yet aware of the quiet warmth in her tone. He didn't reply, but the thought stayed with him as they followed the children into the darkening street, their laughter pulling them forward. The street outside the diner glowed under a row of old lampposts, their lights spilling across the cracked sidewalks in uneven pools. The children ran a few steps ahead, Sophie clutching Liam's hand as if the argument about milkshakes had dissolved into a pact of friendship. Their laughter rose and fell, the sound bright against the hush of evening traffic. Daniel and Olivia walked behind them, slower, their shoulders brushing now and then as if the closeness required no explanation. The cool air carried the faint scent of rain on pavement, though the clouds had passed hours earlier. Daniel stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets, still uneasy about the stranger's words in the diner, about being seen as something larger than the man he felt himself to be. "You don't like the attention?" Olivia said quietly. It wasn't a question. Daniel exhaled through his nose. "I don't need people pointing and saying hero. I was just there. I did what I had to." She turned her head slightly, studying him. "Most people freeze. Or run." "Maybe," he admitted. His eyes stayed on the children, the way Sophie tugged Liam toward a puddle so they could leap across it together. "But I couldn't. Not with her standing there." Silence stretched between them, filled by the rhythmic slap of sneakers ahead. Olivia's hand brushed against his, first accidental, then deliberate. He didn't pull away. For a few strides, they walked like that, fingers barely touching, an invisible line drawn between past caution and present trust. Finally, her voice dropped low, steady but trembling at the edges. "You saved me too, you know." Daniel blinked, turning to her. "You were never in danger." "That's not what I mean." She glanced at Sophie, then back at him. In the lamplight, her eyes held none of the boardroom polish, only something rawer. "I've spent years protecting everything. My company, my daughter, my image. I built walls so high I forgot what it felt like to breathe outside of them. Then one day, a stranger threw himself in front of a gun, and suddenly those walls didn't matter. You showed me something I thought I'd lost." Daniel felt his throat tighten, the words catching in him before they could form. He wasn't used to hearing gratitude stripped of performance. He searched for a reply, but what came out was simple. "I just couldn't let her be hurt." "And that," Olivia said softly, "is exactly why I can't let go of this. Of you." Her hand slid fully into his, warm against the night chill. For a moment, Daniel forgot the pain still healing in his side, forgot the unease of recognition in the diner. What remained was the steady weight of her fingers twined with his, and the sound of two children laughing up ahead, carrying them forward into a future neither of them had expected to find. They walked on in silence, but it was a silence filled not with absence, but with the promise of something real beginning to take shape. The bookstore's windows glowed at the corner, warm squares of light spilling across the sidewalk like a welcome mat. Sophie and Liam raced ahead toward it, their laughter bouncing against the glass before darting back to Daniel and Olivia like a tether. They stopped only when Sophie pressed her face against the window to point out a display of children's books, her breath fogging the glass. Liam joined her, his finger tracing an imaginary path over the spines, already explaining which ones they could read together. Daniel slowed his pace, letting the children's excitement set the tone of the evening. He felt the rhythm of Olivia's steps beside his, measured and steady, no longer the clipped cadence of a song, moving from one meeting to the next. Tonight, she walked as though time itself had loosened around her. Their hands were still linked, her grip firm enough to assure, gentle enough to invite. For months, he had lived by necessity, days divided between keeping bills at bay and making sure Liam never felt the hollow of what they'd lost. Now, for the first time, Daniel realized he wasn't calculating the next step forward alone. He glanced at Olivia, and she met his look without hesitation, the lamplight catching in her eyes. There was no performance there, only the same quiet resolve he'd heard in the park when she promised she would not forget. Ahead, Sophie waved for them to hurry, her ponytail bouncing as she tugged at Liam's sleeve. "Come on, you're too slow," Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Seems we're being summoned." Olivia's smile broke through, unguarded. "Then we'd better keep up." They closed the distance together, their children waiting just beyond the glow of the glass. The sight struck Daniel with unexpected force. Two kids leaning shoulder to shoulder, pointing at books they would share, and two adults approaching not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as something closer, an emerging unit, stitched together by choice as much as chance. For a heartbeat, Daniel saw it as if from outside himself. The widowed father, the formidable mother, the children who had drawn them into orbit. A shape forming not through plans or contracts, but through laughter, gratitude, and the kind of trust born when someone decides to stand in the way of danger. He let the thought settle deep in him. This was not obligation. It was not debt. It was something cleaner, steadier. A chance at family rebuilt, not on memory of what had been lost, but on the living proof of what could be protected, nurtured, and shared. As they reached the window, Sophie looked up with a grin too wide for her small face. Liam matched it, his eyes bright with the uncomplicated joy of being wanted. Olivia squeezed Daniel's hand once, firm and certain. Daniel breathed out slowly, the knot inside him loosening. He no longer needed to measure the moment against what came before. For the first time in a long while, he simply stepped forward into the light with them. The four of them moved on together, no longer fragments pulled from separate lives, but the beginning of something whole.